Hello, and welcome to The Things That Don't Change, where we endeavor to view an ever changing world through the lens of eternity. I'm Thomas Walheim, that is Chris Hayden, and today we have a variety of topics that we're going to talk about. In previous iterations of this little exercise, we did a sort of spin wheel of topics, and we realized it's probably just more efficient to make a list, so we just made a list this time. Um, but we have a few topics that we want to talk about for a few minutes to a few more minutes each, depending on our level of interest. But yeah, with that, Chris, do you want to say hello and then intro our first subject?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. And the first thing we have on the list today is the pressure of the intellectual tradition of Catholicism, which is an
Yeah,
interesting topic because this is something I think about. I struggle with. I'm not really sure necessarily like the best way to kind of go about handling these types of things because, at least in my experience, I've we're very intellectual fellas. Like this podcast is a
mhm.
very intellectual
Or at least
podcast.
we like to pretend we
Um,
are.
yeah. I mean, we're a bunch of idiots, just like anyone else. So hey, what are you gonna do? But over the years, as I've kind of gotten more into the intellectual tradition of Catholicism and just into kind of knowing the saints or the theologies, Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, these types of people, I always struggle when it comes to people that I know who want to get deeper into the faith, but have trouble because they aren't as into that.
Right.
So I think this is an interesting thing to discuss and kind of
Yeah.
hash out a bit. So
It,
what do you think?
Yeah, because here's the thing. So I'm gonna intro kind of the basic idea of it through a little anecdote. So I got together with my old pastor. Love this man to death. Wonderful man. Um, and he and I were discussing something going on in the church. I don't even remember what it was. And he said, "Oh, well, did you see what Bishop Snyder said about it?" And and I went, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Bishop Snyder." And I was like, "Who's that?" And he was like, "Bishop Athanasius Snyder." Like his eyes went wide. He was like in such disbelief. He's like, "Athanasius Snyder?" I was like, "That's a cool name." I was, sorry, Father, I have no idea what you're talking about. And and I struggle with this vice where I like to pretend that I know what people are talking about, and nod along, and then try to see if I can piece it together by context because I don't want to seem dumb. But I was like, this is one time where I'm just gonna full out admit I have no idea what you're talking about or who this man is. And he was like, "Oh, I thought you would have known about him because you're such a trad." And I was like, I'm more of the read the Desert Fathers kind of trad rather than the know who the current magisterium is kind of
Yeah.
trad. Um, and so like it's that sort of thing that we feel like we got to fit into the box, right? And the people who take this seriously tend to be really well read on certain things or certain people or certain writers
Right.
or be into certain devotions. And I'm particularly focusing on the intellectual tradition of the faith, but it's an overarching thing. Like we in a very early episode of the show, we talked about how one thing that we kind of forget because we like uniformity within Catholicism. We like for things to match. And so we kind of try to make things uniform that don't need to be uniform, and that includes
Yeah.
our own temperaments and personalities. Um, so, for instance, I really enjoy the writings of Saint Thomas Aquinas, right? And so I'll be able to talk a little bit about what did Saint Thomas write. However, once someone says well, I really like Augustine's take on that more. I've read basically no Augustine,
Yeah.
and
I've read
and
the
I want
Confessions,
to
understood like 15% of
some
it.
of it. I understood that this guy has way too much memory about his infancy, and
Yeah.
like it's so like I want to pretend that I do know Augustine though, you know, because
Yeah.
because oh well, the people I know who are really read up on this, they know Augustine, and like particularly when you are an aspiring intellectual, let's say, like you like to grapple with it, but you want to feel well read. There's this tendency to try to find something niche and and just sort of build on that and like get really deep into that so that you seem like you're really well read on a very obscure topic, or to a level of um, microscopic detail, you know? And so, for instance, when we're talking to like Patrick, he'll say something about, oh, well, that's just Alphonsian redemptorism. Like, cool. And I don't even know if
Yeah.
that's a thing. What I just said, I don't know if that's a thing, but it sounds like something he would say, right?
Sounds like something
And
he
he's
would
like,
say. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, oh, that's just the Alphonsian redemptorist tradition. And I'd be like, right, right, right. What? Like, what did you just say? Because I want to pretend that I know, because um, because otherwise I'm going to seem like, oh, I don't take this as seriously as you do. And I think that's an insecurity that a lot of people share, particularly when it comes to people, as you were saying, that might know a few
Yeah.
people like that, but aren't that, they don't have that temperament, they don't have that style, that personality. That's not their kiln out of which they were fired, you know? It's a it's a pressure of, well, I need to be like this type of person. I need to know
Yeah.
these things. I need to have read these things. And it's like, yeah, you need to have maybe read your Bible, and past that I don't really care what you read. You know? Like,
Right.
it's like that's I don't know. I feel like that's a pressure that a lot of people deal with that we struggle to relieve ourselves from, even those of us who have been in the faith for a very long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's easy to kind of, because obviously the faith is such a vast ocean of wealth and knowledge and tradition and all those other great things. And it's easy to on one hand feel pressure to engage with it all, but then if you've gotten past that to then okay, you have your thing, but then to kind of hunker down in your thing and maybe unintentionally give off the vibe that that's kind of what Catholicism is that thing that you're super
Yeah.
passionate about. And it's like, well, no, that maybe that for you that thing
Right.
works and that's good. That devotion, that I don't know, chaplet or scapular or rosary or whatever
Right.
your thing is, that devotion, that saint. But at the same time, we have to always have that keep that in mind that the church it's a body with many members, right? And
Right.
a hand isn't a foot, isn't an eye, isn't an ear. So we kind of all have different ways to engage in that. We have our Thomas Aquinas, we also have our Mother Teresa's, right? We also have
Right.
our Saint Francis, also have our Augustines or Benedicts. We have all these different figures who come from such broad backgrounds, and we're united in faith. But when it comes to our practice of that and kind of our understanding of that, there can be some legitimate variation there. We have how many doctors of the church, like 30 or something, who all have their own little way that they kind of go about things and great wealth of knowledge in that. But yeah, we don't need to know it all. And also we shouldn't try to bind other people in where we found our home in the church,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Right. So here's an example of that is that you said we have how many doctors in the of the church? 30 maybe? And I had a temptation to go like, yeah, something like that. The answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I never
I'm
counted them.
tempted to Google it, but
But but yeah, it's like I don't have to know how many doctors of the church there are. I just have to know this person's a saint, and so I can take what they're saying with some level of credence. That'll probably be fine if I just regard it that way. Not
yeah.
that being a doctor of the church is meaningless. It's a pretty cool thing to be, but I don't have to know all of the little trivia, right?
Yeah.
So I think in some ways we can view our Christianity as a fabric with which we clothe ourselves, but we can make different outfits, you know? And
Okay.
so if we have this fabric that is meant that we're meant to robe ourselves in, some of us will make robes and cloaks and capes, and some of us will make suits, some of us will make cargo pants, right? And we can't look at somebody else who is validly using the cloth to make clothes to clothe themselves for practical purposes for their particular life and lifestyle, um, and say, well, you're doing it wrong. Because the people that I know who are really into this cloth tend to make this garment out of it. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, unless the person who provided the cloth said, like, you must make this particular fashion out of it, you're kind of free to do it as the cloth best fits you, as you'll best utilize it, as you'll make sure it doesn't go to waste. Because there are going to be some people for whom learning Latin to read the Summa in its original language is going to be wasted energy. You know,
Mhm.
like there are some people that will really make their faith come alive, right? Like there'll
Yeah.
be some people that love that sort of thing, and it really enlivens their experience with God, and it gives them something to like really devote themselves to in the faith. But there are going to be some people for which that's wasted time, wasted energy, wasted effort that could have been better spent other ways growing closer to God. You
Yeah.
know, like I might just not really be um, the intellectual type of person, but I don't really have to be. I can just say, yeah, I don't really know what such and such saint said about so and so, but all I know is that I love God and I'm trying to pray as best I can and stay close to Him and stay close to the sacraments. And I'm sort of going where the church tells me to go. Great. You're probably better off than the guy who's just trying to study himself to heaven, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's something
Yeah.
that's sorry, God.
No, I mean, yeah, no, I think there's that. I agree with that, because yeah, like I've seen people, on YouTube, you see all kinds of different people come from obviously all kinds of different perspectives. People who are in the church, who are converts, who are cradle Catholics, who are, what have you. And I remember, seeing some people who were like trying to convert, and their way of going about it was like kind of bringing it down to like a probabilistic thing, or trying to get really deep into these little minutia things, and it's like maybe that's working for you, and more power to you. If that's how you need to look into it, go for it. But like, I find that very unhelpful for me. Like it's just not. Again, my brain doesn't work that way. I don't see the world in mathematical probabilities. I'm not the most like deeply minutiae type person when it comes to different topics. So yeah, something more surface level is a little more my speed. I'm gonna go my own way and figure something out. But power to you if you want to get into it that deeply.
And it's interesting to note that we're talking about it mainly from our perspective of the intellectual person looking at the non-intellectual person and sort of
Hmm.
judging them for not fitting their kiln. It can also
Yeah.
go the other way though, that there'll
Yeah.
be the average everyday sort of garden variety Christian, right? And they'll see the guy who's getting really into the writings of the doctors of the church, who's getting really into Bonaventure and Scotus and Aquinas and more, and that's capital M More, as in Thomas More, not just etc.
And
But
more.
yes, and more. But wait, there's more. Um, the Henry VIII trying to declare himself head of the Church of England. But wait, there's more. But, but anyway, um, like they might really love the philosophy and theology handed down through the centuries by these different saints and scholars, and someone might say, I don't understand. Like they might out of an insecurity or just out of a sort of resentment toward the what they view as someone looking down on them in some way. But they might say, I mean, what's the point? Like nobody came to God because of they were really convinced by the cosmological argument. They came to God because they encountered Christ, they encountered God, they
Right.
encountered all these blessings. And it's like, some people did. Like some
Yeah.
people do. Some people are brought on by those intellectual arguments. That being said, being read up on the faith is not the same thing as being faithful. You're correct in that. But that's not to poo-poo what has been handed down to us in the intellectual tradition of the church. Tradition is
Right.
nothing if not the sum of everything that has worked up to this point. So looking at what have people said so that I can really immerse myself in the knowledge of God so that I can know him better, so that I can love him better. Some people really do function that way, and that's also fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true, and I think like um, I think Vatican II. I think kind of in the documents of Vatican II did a good job at kind of taking the like Vatican II gets a lot of bad rap for a lot of different things, but like when you
Yeah.
actually read the documents, like it's very good at kind of going down into the deep depths of our tradition and then kind of bringing it back up and then stating it in a very easy to understand kind of way, where it's
Yeah.
like, like kind of bringing that out and presenting that in a more what's the word, not palatable, um, but just a more easy to understand, I guess, kind of way.
An easy and masticable sense. Yes.
Yeah,
Like,
Pope Benedict was also really good at that. The Pope Benedict,
yeah.
the Ratzinger that I've read, it's very easy to understand. It's very deep, but very easy to understand.
Right. So, Pope Benedict, Cardinal Ratzinger, one of the great things one of the things he was really gifted at was that he was really good at putting things into those easy and um, sort of grappleable terms, graspable. It was tangible and real to people without being diluted. And I think a large part of that was that he was a big philosophy guy. Like he really enjoyed reading the people who would do all these demonstrations of the truths of the faith, where they were doing these proofs, essentially. They were saying, here's the premise, and now I'm going to give the best arguments against it, and then I'm going to show where those arguments fall apart. That's what the Summa
Mhm.
is in its entirety.
Yeah,
Like most of Thomas's writing is in that style, that I'm demonstrating how these arguments don't hold up to the philosophy that we have um, had handed down to us, throughout the centuries by all the greatest thinkers, religious or otherwise. But the thing about Pope Benedict is that he loved reading those people, but he wasn't a demonstrator himself. He didn't really deal in demonstration. He dealt in monstration. He was like, yeah, I'm just
Mhm.
going to show you what the truth is, and that's kind of it. I'm
Yeah,
not going to go through all of the arguments against it. I'm not going to go through the proofs of why this stands to reason. I'm just going to tell you what's what.
yeah.
And if you want to look into it more, great. I'm not your guy. You
Right.
know?
Here's Aquinas. Here's
Right.
Augustine. Here's
Right.
this church father. Here's Irenaeus or Justin Martyr or something.
Right. And in a similar fashion, I think that's honestly what Bishop Barron's really good at as well. Is that
Absolutely. Yeah.
he's very good at just sort of placing the ideas before you, and then should you need more proof or more convincing or more detail, here's von Balthasar, here's
Right.
Aquinas, here's more. It's like here are the different theologians from throughout the centuries that spoke to this in a more granular detail. I'm not your guy for that, you know? And
Yeah.
I can respect that humility. Just the idea of like, yeah, I'm just a guy who's taken in some good things, and so I'm presenting them, but I don't have to prove them. I don't have to.
Hmm.
I don't have to demonstrate how they stand to reason and stand against argument. People have done that far better than I can. Many of them have
Yeah.
saint or blessed in front of their name.
Again, just to kind of go a little farther on that. Yeah, I think that that's just something that us, especially as us in the Catholic media space, could probably stand to just keep in mind. Because it's easy to come out and talk about something and be like, oh yes, this is a novel idea, or to talk about something as if we're the first to ever say it, and that's
Yeah,
never going to be true. I
yeah,
mean, for 2,000 years, people way smarter than us have been saying that. So just making sure, I guess, in our, to kind of keep that in mind, I think is definitely important, especially when you're online, dialoguing with people. It's easy to kind of act like you're the expert when
right.
none of us really are.
Yeah, and I think it's easy, particularly in the sort of information age, to get kind of caught up in this because it's worth noting a lot of people are converting to Catholicism lately.
Yeah,
Catholicism's way cooler than it used to be, um, and it's really kind of coming into a new heyday, and it's fashionable now. And I think that's because it's the information age, and people are starting to realize Catholicism is really smart. Like
yeah,
Catholicism
yeah,
has a lot of just depth of intellectual tradition
yeah.
that
And this is
other
something I've been
denominations don't have. You know?
Yeah, no, this is something I've been thinking a lot about just in general recently. Just the idea that like for all the for all the criticism we give the internet and all this media that we have, which definitely deserved, um, like I think that the internet for Catholicism is going to be like one of the pivotal tools of the age, the Christian age, because like you can't like you can't really have the Protestants who kind of scare their congregation with the false idea of what Catholicism is. You can't really have the Jack Chicks anymore because
Yeah.
you can just Google it and see what Joe
Right.
Heschmeyer is saying or what Trent Horn's saying and see, oh, Catholics don't actually believe in,
Right.
some idolatrous thing or this or that. Like just these ideas, these false ideas about Catholicism, you can't present them anymore because a quick Google search, you ask ChatGPT, and it's going to tell you, like what the catechism is actually saying, or like what Catholics out there are saying about the things. So I feel like
Right.
in that way, like a lot of these issues or these divisions between Christians that are born out of misunderstandings, you can't really have them anymore. And what's going to win out is truth, and what is truth is the Catholic faith. So honestly, like I've been thinking about that
Right.
more and more, and I think that the internet is going to be a huge boon for us just in general going forward, as long as obviously we're using it to a good, in a good way as a tool to evangelize. And people like Bishop Barron have definitely been leading the way in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a truth to that. That back when the Protestant Reformation, like you had to come up with some really convincing arguments for the
Yeah.
average person against Catholicism. Why? Because everyone was Catholic. Like they already had a true exposure to Catholicism, so you need to be able to poke at something that they already are questioning
Yeah.
in their actual experience of Catholicism at the time in that place, right? And the as time went on, now we have generations and generations and generations further removed from Catholicism. It's hundreds of years later, and now we have people that their last Catholic relative was 400 years ago,
Yeah.
and they have very little exposure. And so, if you're in, let's say, 1920, um, if you're in 1920 and you're a Protestant, and someone tells you that the Catholics worship statues or they worship Mary or that they think the Pope is Jesus or like a lot of people I came across a lot of people in my earlier days that thought that the Catholic view on the Pope was that he was the reincarnation of Jesus and
Interesting.
like it's like nowhere near
Yeah.
what we've ever taught, but it's sort of be like, okay, I guess that's just out there somewhere. That's the rumor that was going around. But
Yeah.
it's like if you're in 1920, to dispel that, you need to know a Catholic. And unless your
Right.
Catholic neighbor happens to be Scott Hahn, like he's
Yeah.
not gonna know what to say.
Right.
like the average Catholic was just sort of be like, I don't know, man. We you say we worship statues? Well, we do pray in front of them. Does that count? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like you say that we think that the Pope is the reincarnation of Christ. I don't even know who the Pope is. I don't know. Maybe some people do. Like, you know, like, and so you can't really have that anymore. Where we have such a length at this point in which everyone has exposure to Catholicism, and if somebody has a bad exposure, they can just be like, "Do Catholics really believe this?" And granted, sometimes they don't. There are a lot of things that I might think about Islam that I will never think to Google if it's true, you
Yeah.
know, because I have no interest. And in the same way, a lot of people just don't have an interest in Catholicism, and so they won't check. They're not going to fact check it. But there is going to be less of that. But also because of that, we have a lot of people who are realizing that either for reasons of pride or reasons of humility, which is a very interesting thing, that they need to convert to Catholicism because Catholicism seems so grounded as a religion, you
Yeah.
know? And that can be a matter of humility of I'm realizing that the 2000 years of the church and the magisterium is wiser and closer to Christ and his teachings than I am in my 20 something years of life. But also it could be for a reason of pride of oh well, I realized that I need some sort of religion, and Catholicism seems like the respectable and dignified one, you
Yeah.
know? Like that's the cool one. That's the one that mobsters had, you know? You never have
Yeah.
a mobster movie with like the Presbyterian guy, you know? Like,
Right. Or the horror movie without
There's
the
no-
Catholic priest.
right. Yeah, you're never gonna have a horror movie in which someone's like, "Oh, go get the Unitarian Church of Tomorrow's pastor or whatever." Like, Go
Yeah, I
go
think I
get
saw one
Pastor
horror
Jim from the
movie.
mini mall. Like,
Yeah, like I think I saw one horror movie where it was like the Episcopal pastor or something. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry, this just doesn't like
yeah,
what are we doing here? It didn't
we've
work.
talked
He
about this
he, he
before.
failed at
The
his role in that movie.
yeah, yeah. We've talked about this before, I think, talking about like people wanting a Catholic adjacent religion, but not really wanting to define exactly what it is. But like, I think about The Walking Dead. I watched most of The Walking Dead. This is a really funny thing. I I watched The Walking Dead up until 4 episodes before the finale, and just realized I was done with it and never picked it up again.
Amen.
Like normally you're like, oh, now I'm invested, and so I want to see it
Yeah,
through the end. I was like, nah, this is boring at this point.
I
I'm not
mean
gonna watch
from
4 more hours of this.
yeah, I mean from what I
Um,
hear, the Game of Thrones fans would probably be in the same boat. It's like you know what? Let's not even bother to finish the season.
yeah. The but like they have this one character, Gabriel, and he's the priest, and he's an interesting character because he is plagued with the guilt and scruples of having failed his congregation, because when
Hmm.
his congregation started turning into zombies, he just like locked everyone out rather than like harboring people in his church and keeping them safe,
Right.
and um and so he's feeling like I failed in my vows to my congregation, or whatever their understanding of Christianity was. And at one point in like the later seasons, it was like season like 8 or something, they had this budding romance between him and some character that no one ever considered to be fully human, and so it was a very unnatural romance, and everyone was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" But they were rolling with that, and eventually he like goes to kiss her or something, and she goes, "Wait, I thought priests weren't allowed to, get married or have sex or whatever." And he goes, "I'm Episcopalian. That's Catholics." And it's like, oh, we're just going to throw that in there as a little disclaimer. I appreciate that you did, because otherwise this would cause some scandal. But it was sort of
Yeah.
a like, that's never been discussed once in the series before that. It's just sort of a like, but like they used him for so many Catholic motifs, and then they're like, oh, but we don't want him to be like Catholic, because then we can't play with some themes that we want to play with.
See, they're
Um,
really savvy. They
so
could have
yeah, that
said
was always
he's
funny.
Orthodox.
Right. Yeah. The and well, then there would have been the whole thing of like, oh well, are you already ordained? Then you can't get married. Blah blah blah.
True, true.
But
Fair enough.
but yeah, you could have just said like, oh, I'm one of the really trad Anglican offshoots, or something like that.
Yeah.
Um. So, um, going back a little bit, you said this thing about how essentially like we're talking about Bishop Barron. We're talking about the idea of I'm not your guy. Like you want more detail? Cool, I'm not your guy. Some of these people who I'm pointing to will have saint or blessed or venerable in front of their name, whereas I only have bishop in front of my name. I personally only have Mister in front of my name, and
Yeah.
so like that's that sort of humility comes into play, which brings us actually to a different topic on the list. And this is totally out of order, but I'm just going to roll right into it, um, which is the dichotomy of being somebody in the church versus being nobody in the church.
Yeah.
Like you and I, we do this regular show. We have a weekly Catholic podcast that we do, and in some ways that could build up our egos to be like, oh, well, we're somebody because we have a platform, right? And we've gone into this in the past that platforms used to need to be given to you, and now you can just make one.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a strange thing. Like we were given a platform by Domestic Church Media back when we were a radio show, and then we went independent. We decided to just do it as a podcast, but it's like that was a platform given to us, and thank you very much to them. Um, but in a sense, yeah, we could say that we are somebody. We're public personalities, but in another sense, we're kind of nobodies. You know,
Right.
like we're just two guys. And that's one of the things I actually love about Catholicism, is because when I was working as a youth minister, um, I don't remember what I was filling out. I was filling out some form, and it said, "What's your occupation?" And you had to pick what field you were in, and then there was a pre-prescribed list of positions within that field. There was no other that you could define yourself, and so I said, "What do you work in?" And I said, "Oh, church and religion and ministry or something like that." And I said, "Oh, and what's your position?" And the closest thing I could find, because it was clearly written by a Protestant, was pastor. And
Hmm.
I was like, I mean, by a Protestant reckoning, I'm a pastor
Yeah.
because I'm a guy who gives talks about Jesus to these people. I'm a youth pastor. Whereas to me, I'm just some guy that the pastor hired.
Right.
you know, I'm just a dude who said, "Yeah, I'll lead this group, and so I'm going to read up on these things, and then I'm going to present these things to you, and I'm just going to be their liaison to you, the priest." You know, and so that was always how I viewed myself was I'm just the middleman between these kids and the priest. If any of these kids come to me with anything that they need to talk about, they're more than welcome to talk to me. But if they need absolution, I'll be like, sure, let me set up an appointment for you to like
Yeah. That's not
get a
something you can do.
one-on-one with the priest. I was like, you can confess whatever you want to me, but I can't absolve you.
Right.
Like but like I don't know, things like that. It's like that idea of to be somebody in the church kind of requires at least a collar, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is we are part of a church that's very um, well, it's structured because Christ instituted a structure, right?
Right, it's very
And ever
hierarchical.
since, yeah, and ever since the Bible, we've had that, So yeah, I guess it is an interesting kind of position, especially nowadays, post Vatican II, with the laity kind of coming into um, not necessarily authoritative roles, but
But
into just
ministerial
more,
roles.
yeah, ministerial roles in different ways. Um, yeah, kind of how that affects the calculus a bit, while at the same time probably takes a bit of a pressure off of us.
Yeah.
Because like yeah, like if you were a youth pastor, that's a lofty position to have. You're the pastor of the youth,
Yeah.
so like there's a lot of responsibility to not lead astray, and of course you could still lead astray as Catholic laity. But at the very end, at the end of things, at the end of the day, there you can always kind of be like, let me defer to Father so and so on that, to the pastor, and kind
Yeah.
of lean back on the authority there, and then he leans back on the authority of the bishop, and the bishop can lean back on the authority of the pope, and then the pope's just got to lean back on God. I don't know what to tell
Yeah.
him, but
Right. The you, I'm thinking of that meme that surfaced when Pope Leo was given his papal insignia ring, and he's looking at it, and there's that meme. There's like that moment where you realize that this is your circus, and they're all your monkeys. Like there's a lot of pressure on being the Pope. That's like why we stress so much that you need to pray for the Pope is that there's a lot of pressure that you and I as lay people don't experience.
yeah,
That's
it's
like,
easy for us to get
yeah,
on our YouTube channel and talk about, oh, well, we don't do this, but we could
right,
get on and be like, oh, the Pope doing this or the Pope doing that. It's like
right,
I couldn't even imagine what some guy
yeah,
in a different country of all places trying to run the entire world church, like
yeah,
what comes on his plate. Like I couldn't even imagine.
right. Because there's something to like we talked about this before. The when we're talking about obedience is freedom, which is
Yeah,
as red blooded Americans an idea that we're like allergic to,
very
but
much.
it's very much a Christian idea that like yeah no like you are obedient to your parents, for instance, until the priest is telling you to do something different, and you obey the priest until the bishop tells you something different. You obey the bishop until the magisterium tells you something different. You do what the magisterium says until the pope tells you something different. You do what the pope says until God has told you something different. And it's like at each of those levels, if you don't know what someone of a higher authority said, if you just like obey your parents, right? When you're like, let's say you're like 12 years old, you don't really know right from wrong. And like it's never really been taught to you by any sort of higher authority. And so your parents tell you to like steal something out of a shop. Is that your fault? No, it's your parents' fault. They are held accountable for that. Like you may or may not actually be held accountable here on earth, but in a moral sense by God, you are not accountable for that. You're not answerable to that. Your parents were supposed to teach you better. And so that's on them. Whereas if you have been taught that and then you go against it, then it's on you. The Pope on earth is the highest level of that. And so he can't plead ignorance.
No.
If the church has been misled, it's kind of his problem. Not his fault necessarily, but his problem. You
Hmm.
know? Might not have been his doing, he might have had no hand in it. But this is my circus, these are my monkeys, you know? And so that's like an immense pressure to have on one man. I would we were talking in the interregnum between Francis and Leo about if you were elected pope, what would the first few days in office be like, just for comedy's sake? But I'm just like, dang, I hope it never happens.
Right.
Like, I
No
know it
way.
technically could on a highly
Yeah.
technical level. Yes, you only need to be Catholic and male to be pope. Those are the only two technical qualifiers. But I was like, but if we get to the point of desperation where they elect one of us as pope, gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But boy, would they try during my papacy.
Yeah.
Oh man, but yeah, but there's something honestly really peaceful in Catholicism about I'm nobody. I'm somebody in the eyes of God, but
Right.
within the hierarchy of the church, I'm just some guy.
Right.
You know, and there's there's a pleasure in that, a real peace that we can take in that. I was telling you off air before we recorded. We were talking about our current bishop, who seems great. Seems like he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
Um, but we had a rather long episcopate prior to him, and I was involved in a lot of things throughout the diocese. Like, I worked at a couple of different parishes at a time. I was volunteering at like three different things. I went to two separate Newman clubs at two separate universities. Like, I was around. So like wherever he went, I was there. and and so I realized that at the end of by the end of his episcopate, he knew me by name. Like when he would see me, he would just go like, "Oh, Tom." So, and I was like, I've never had a meeting with this guy. I've had maybe two conversations with him ever,
Yeah.
but it was like a decade later, and he would still be like, "So, Tom," and he would just like address me like that. And I was like, on the one hand, it's cool to be known by your bishop. On the other hand, the bishop could know you for several reasons.
It's true.
Like that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, and and so like when our current bishop came in, I was saying to you, I was like, there's something that part of me would like love to meet him, have a conversation with him, and it will obviously be an honor to be with a prince of the church, and yet there's also something that I really love about the fact that the bishop has no idea who I am. Like
Yeah.
I'm just random subject number 128, and
Bold of you to think
there's
you're
a
that
real
high
freedom to
up.
that. Right? Yeah, I'm probably like 2319 or something like that. Um, yeah, but um, but yeah, I'm nowhere within the folders of his mind.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a piece in that being like, yeah, no, nobody in the hierarchy really knows who I am individually, and and that's good because that means I'm just focusing on my relationship with God. And most of the time, if the hierarchy knows who you are, it's because you're a troublemaker.
Commonly, yes. Especially
Sometimes
especially at
not.
our
Sometimes
level.
it's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Particularly when you're like a public personality. Like if bishops start knowing your name, it's because you're in like public feuds with them or something.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if we just focus on kind of being good sons or daughters of the church, I think that's kind of a good place to kind of keep ourselves molded and not trying to be anything further than that.
right. Yeah, because I think we do get caught up a lot of the time in trying to figure out what is our higher role within the church, and
Mm.
and particularly when we're young, or at least young in our walk of faith, we tend to focus more on that of like, oh, should I be a priest? Should I be a nun? Should I be a public speaker? Should I be whatever? Particularly if you're a more gregarious personality, or if you're not a more gregarious personality and you wish you were. Like, you start thinking of like, okay, but what platform should I end up on? And really, it's kind of like that sort of mo money, mo problems sort of thing. Like,
Hmm.
it's like, yeah, like platforms are great if you're meant to have one, but otherwise, it just kind of comes with a lot more responsibility than you realize you want. And so I think there's something freeing just saying, yeah, I'm just going to be focused. I'm just going to focus on being a good son of the church, a good daughter of the church, and just fulfilling my role with God before I do anything else. Because the last thing we need is bishops or priests or nuns or wives or husbands who ascended into that role just because, well, I felt like I was supposed to. What we need is people who are really grounded with God and then just sort of went where they were called, you know?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know about you, I think that that'd be a good place to kind of leave it on.
Sounds good to me. Glory to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. Go be holy, everybody.
Amen.
Go be good sons and daughters. Nice.